Hello and welcome to Banfield. Governor Sarah Palin is going to join me in just a moment with her reaction to the latest revelations from the January 6th hearing that just wrapped up. A hearing that focused on the 187 minutes during which the people closest to the president say that Donald Trump ignored the pleas from his aides, lawmakers, family members, and close advisors to do something, anything, to stop his supporters from laying waste to the Capitol. Among the star witnesses, Matthew Pottinger, Trump's deputy national security advisor and the highest-ranking White House official to quit on that very day, January 6th. For him, the last straw was Trump's now infamous tweet after the rioters were inside the Capitol, berating Mike Pence for not attempting to hinder the electoral vote count.
I was disturbed and worried to see that the president was attacking Vice President Pence for doing his constitutional duty. So the tweet looked to me like the opposite of what we really needed at that moment, which was a de-escalation. That's why I had said earlier that it looked like fuel being poured on the fire. So that was the moment that I decided that I was going to resign, that would be my last day at the White House. I simply didn't want to be associated with the events that were unfolding on the Capitol.
I want to talk about this and a world of other issues, political and otherwise, with one of the most recognized names in politics, Sarah Palin. She went from mayor to governor to vice presidential candidate and made stops at best-selling author and TV personality all along the way. She's made history, she's sparked controversy, and she changed how candidates are chosen and how campaigns are run. Several pundits even credit her with paving the way for Donald Trump's presidency, and she is not done yet. Now she has her sights set on a new destination, Congress. Governor Palin is running in a special election on August the 16th to fill the single Alaskan congressional seat vacated by the passing of Don Young. She knows better than anyone how grueling and how unforgiving campaigns can be. So, big question, why put herself and her family through it again? And there's no one better to answer that question than the candidate herself, Governor Sarah Palin. Sarah, thank you so much for being here. Governor, I would imagine you have heard some of what just wrapped up in the 8th January 6th hearing. And for a lot of people who are watching, it's disturbing. For those who are not watching, they don't care. Where do you fall in on this?
Oh, I care. You know, I'm looking at it at I guess, a pretty elementary level to start with, and that is, what the heck was anybody thinking to go vandalize our Capitol? Nobody can think that that is right. It was atrocious what these protesters did, and anyone who encouraged it needs to be held accountable. But a hearing like this, Ashleigh, there needs to be balance. There needs to be, I would think, Republicans also, and not just the two whom we have seen questioning, but other Republicans on board to do follow-up questions and maybe present more evidence, more testimony. So, you know, I think it's a given that it's a one-sided type of hearing, but what we're hearing is quite disturbing.
It's very disturbing. Do you fault Kevin McCarthy for, you know, not providing that slate of candidates to be on the panel?
I do not know why in the world we don't have more candidates, more balance on that panel. And I haven't heard Kevin McCarthy's explanation for that, but surely there is an explanation. What I have heard, Ashleigh, is that it was an impossibility, is that those running the show did not want other Republicans. So, you know, there's he said, she said on that one.
So I, cover so many trials, and I looked at this, hearing not as a trial because, like you said, it is a prosecutorial presentation without cross-examination or defense. But it's incredible how often in a case, in a trial, a jury's mind can be made up when that prosecution presents its case. Usually they don't take the case unless they think they can win it in the first place. Do you think that regardless of the process, regardless of, the lack of cross-examination and a defense, that this has been a compelling, 8 rounds of hearings of a dereliction of duty is what they call what happened?
It has been very compelling, but no, I still want to stay focused on process. I think it's very, very important that both sides are given the same forum, the same format, the same platform to present evidence on both sides. I think that's what the American people want to hear. There are still questions about what happened on January 6th. There's still questions about some of the voter issues that had taken place during the Biden-Trump election. And nobody should be afraid of asking the questions, and nobody, I think, should be shunned or ostracized or mocked or anything else for wanting questions to be asked and wanting those in official capacity to be forced to answer some questions. So lots of questions. I think the American public deserves answers, and nobody should be afraid of asking the questions as to what has happened.
So one of the, the two things that I think really stood out tonight was Pat Cipollone, White House counsel, who said in so many words that the president was the only one in the White House that didn't want the protesters to leave. And that was, disappointing to hear, because everybody he surrounded himself with and his trusted advisors said the opposite. And the second thing that was very disheartening, and I'm sure you as a governor would feel this, who's had, Secret Service and security detail, is that Mike Pence's Secret Service were calling their families fearful that they might not make it home and see them again. And it gave me chills, and it hurt me to the core to think that they were thinking that. I'd love to get your reaction to both of those things, that in those 187 minutes, the president was in the dining room and not calling off the protesters, and the Secret Service for his vice president were calling their families saying goodbye.
That's tragic that the Secret Service were, so aware of the dangers and of the potential dangers that they felt the need, to say goodbyes. I mean, that goes back to the people, though, those hoodlums, those protesters, the criminals who invaded the Capitol. And no, it wasn't a peaceful protest. And anyone who tries to argue that, they're not looking at the tape, are they? No, that goes back to whomever these people were. I, right out of the chute, had asked the media not to just dump all Republicans or all Trump movement supporters in one bucket and blame everybody on what these criminals were doing. And I had seen some of that coming out of the chute, so I took issue with that. But no, these guys, they're a different breed of cat, Ashleigh. They were hell bent on doing danger, and that's evidenced by what the outcome was, and it's pretty tragic.
And the videos and the photos, you're right. I mean, those are just crimes, pure and simple. You barely even need a defense to see these pictures and find another reason for why they're doing what they're doing. The one thing, though, is you're right. This has been so polarizing for the country, right? A lot of Republicans have not wanted to watch, much like liberals didn't want to watch Benghazi hearings. So no one knows what's being said if it's not in their, in their philosophical silo. But the White House was full of good Republicans who wanted this to end. And this very concerning point that Pat Cipollone made, that Trump was the only one, the president was the only one who didn't. Do you think that was a big mistake on the part of the president to not do anything within those 187 minutes?
I don't know how often the president has been asked that question, but the president could be asked that question even more adamantly, and we could get answers there. But I do like the point that you're making that, I think it's been human nature that has evolved, I guess, into this in this last decade or so, where all this polarization, people don't want to hear the other side of the story. They're kind of enmeshed in their own four square walls, preaching to the choir, speaking to one another, and not listening to what the heck is going on. And so many things are going on in our country, Ashleigh, that are not being beneficial to the people. So much of the obsessive partisanship and the power grabs going on. And there's a lot of corruption in Washington, D.C. also. I think the American people are so sick and tired of it. And I believe that too, Ashleigh, is why there's going to be a red wave. I believe that voters are going to say, let's try something different. Try this for a couple of years. Now let's try something different. As we see kind of the psyche vacillating anyway, each election cycle, those in office are usually countered with the opposite party in the next election.
You know, liberals and Democrats alike have promised up and down to unite the country and bring down the rhetoric and the fire. It just keeps getting worse. I think, you know, social media certainly hasn't helped any of that. But President Trump, you know, wanted to bring the country together. It didn't happen. President Biden said he was going to bring the country together. It didn't happen. You want to be in Congress. You want to be one of our leaders. How can you help bring the country together? What can Governor Palin, as, you know, representative, as Congressman Palin do to stop the insanity that is making us all hate one another in America?
Yeah. Oh, golly, that's a great question. That's a great point. Hopefully my track record can speak for itself. Me never being so obsessively partisan that I would let the partisanship get in the way of just doing what's right for the people. And when I was governor, I had 87% approval rating. When I was mayor, even before that, I was elected as the president of the Conference of Mayors here. And, you know, I had a lot of support on both sides of the aisle because the issues, at least for me, the issues that I work on, they sure don't seem to be real partisan. It's just common sense, constitutional, perhaps conservatism, solutions that are proposed that, you know, I've been doing for 30 years in my career here in politics in Alaska from the PTA on up. And no, I think that my track record can speak for itself in terms of what I am able to do, reaching across, getting people to feel free to ask questions, and then holding people accountable too, making sure the questions are answered, and that those who are doing anything that is nefarious in terms of what the will of the people is, holding them accountable.
So a couple weeks ago, the guy who a lot of Republicans will say is still the kingmaker, no matter how you slice it, Donald Trump, came up to Alaska and held a rally with you to endorse you. I want to play a quick moment from that rally. I think it was July 9th in Anchorage. Let's take a look at it.
There's nobody like this woman. I've known her so long. She's loyal. She loves the state. She will be a true warrior for your state and for the country. Sarah Palin.
So that's a big old deal, like, you know, him coming up there and doing a rally like that. Tell me what it entails to have President Trump endorse you and make that trip. Do you have to ally with, you know, what he says, which is that the election was stolen? Is that something that you have to buy into, or can you have your own free thoughts on that?
Oh, goodness. I would not be able to function in politics or in anything else if I had to just toe some line and not exert my own independence and my own thinking and my own judgment and discernment. So that goes to play here also in the support that President Trump has for me and that I have for President Trump and the Trump movement, the common sense, constitutional, conservative solutions that he had implemented and were so successful. His policies did work for our nation. And we see what has happened now that President Biden got in there and reversed so many of the big things. And now look where we are with the price of fuel, with inflation skyrocketing, with more and more division in our nation. So no, there's no test that has to be taken in terms of garnering support of a former president, and I appreciate that. President Trump and I, we do have a personal connection also. He, for years, had encouraged me when it came to, say, my children getting clobbered in the media unfairly. Oh my goodness. I mean, that's the most brutal part of politics and in the media, of course. But President Trump has always been gracious to me and encouraging, and I to him also, especially when it comes to family, circling the wagon, making sure that we, at least with one another, know that the things that some things that are said about our families are absolutely unfair, and we really don't have to stand for it.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you a question about that because, man, you really, you know, you took it on the chin. The media was just ruthless. And I don't think that's a partisan thing to say either. I think as women, it's really unfair. I remember the reports about your clothes. Gosh, look, she's got nice clothes. Well, guess what? Men need 2 suits. Women need 50 dresses. Or or there's another complaint, you know, in the headlines. But I'm going to circle back just because you're so good at answering these questions, but not answering my question. And that is the whole notion about the stolen election. You know, we heard all these really patriotic Republicans in the White House saying, we don't believe that the election stolen, Mr. President. These are really smart White House counsel, attorneys. These are aides that he, you know, put all his faith and trust into, his children even. And he seemed to be one of the only ones, except for a couple of others, you know, Rudy Giuliani and that cadre of folks that came in afterwards. But do you believe the election was stolen, or is that becoming an albatross around a candidate's neck to continue that vein?
No, and again, I go back to, this is why I wish that the hearings were more balanced so that we could hear others voice their opinion on whether there was voter fraud or not. Now, I will tell you candidly, there are so many questions still outstanding about the last election. There's been proof of voter fraud in terms of those voting who were not qualified to vote, or who, even dead people voting. I know as a governor, when I was in charge of Division of Elections, I saw that our own voter rolls in Alaska years ago were packed with people who did not even live here. President Obama's right-hand man in the White House, he voted as an Alaskan resident for 20 years when I was governor. Tried to make a big darn deal about that, going, who is this guy? Why is it legal for him to even vote in our elections? Well, he had been back to Alaska one time for a wedding in those 20 years. So I know firsthand what voter rolls look like, the potential for fraud, the potential for some corruption in elections. And I have questions. I'm glad other people are asking the questions. There are still outstanding lawsuits. There are still outstanding investigations. I think we need to have the answer so that I and others can answer directly that question.
So you're
was it stolen
undecided?
Or not?
Does that mean you're undecided and you still want to see? Yeah.
As with anything else, I want to know all the evidence. I want to know all the facts. But I do know firsthand that, yes, elections, if they are not watched closely, yes, they can be fraught with fraud.
It's a good point that you bring up, because absolutely every election has fraud in it in every country, and America's not immune from that. It's the widespread fraud that would have tilted the balance of 7 million votes that I think is the issue in this one. And again, with my legal background, every single case I cover, there's the reasonable doubt standard. And after 60 some odd, cases helmed by judges that, the president actually appointed, at some point you got to sort of say, the evidence is pretty solid here that there's nary a case that's really been proven here that there shows any widespread. That's the only reason I ask at this point as a candidate. It's hard. Like, that's a hard question because it could really anger Donald Trump, which nobody wants to do if you're in the Republican Party. But at the same time, it's got to show what your discerning capabilities are as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and I'm following closely the lawsuit there in Wisconsin. Arizona still is asking questions. There are other states that are still pursuing how their own elections went and what the vote count actually was. And I'm paying attention to those. I want that information.
Okay, me too. I love those things. Me in the legal cases, I'm such a nerd. So when we come back after the break, Governor, you touched on that issue of candidates' children, the children of candidates, because more and more, whether it's the big networks or the cable news channels or social media, they don't seem to be off limits. And I think you might have really borne the brunt of that. So we'll talk a little bit about that and whether that should be off limits completely or gradations of it. I want to hear from you, where things should go in the future. We're back in a moment with Governor Sarah Palin. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.